Historians have told you the exact same story for 500 years. Jane Seymour, Henry VIII's third wife, the one he called his true and only love, died of childbirth fever 12 days after delivering the future King Edward VI. Simple, clean, tragic. A mother making the ultimate holy sacrifice for her country and her king. But here's what they never tell you. The royal physician's private notes, suppressed for nearly 4 centuries, describe a cause of death so entirely different, so deeply disturbing, that Henry VIII personally ordered the documents sealed. Not just archived, sealed, with strict royal instructions that they were never, ever to be opened by the public or the press. What I am about to show you today is not a fringe internet theory. It is not historical fiction. It is drawn directly from contemporaneous court records, panicked ambassador dispatches, intercepted letters, and modern medical analysis that rewrites absolutely everything you think you know about the woman Henry VIII famously mourned. The only wife he actually grieved. Or did he? Before we can uncover the horrifying reality of how she died, we have to look at how she lived and how she was manipulated into the deadliest role in European history. The official narrative is almost too perfect, isn't it? If you read standard history books, Jane Seymour is portrayed as the ultimate antidote to the fiery, dramatic, and fiercely intellectual Anne Boleyn. Jane was the plain, gentle, obedient girl, the peacemaker, the illiterate country noblewoman who finally gave Henry the perfect marriage. It is a beautiful story. It is also a complete and deliberate fabrication. Let me ask you something. Does a gentle, innocent woman strategically position herself to replace a queen who is actively fighting for her life? Henry didn't fall in love with Jane Seymour after Anne Boleyn died. He fell in love with Jane while Anne was still alive, still wearing the crown and still carrying his child. To understand the bloody foundation of Jane's marriage, we have to rewind to January 1536. The ground at Greenwich Palace was frozen solid. King Henry VIII, the magnificent athlete of Europe, fell from his horse during a jousting tournament. The armored horse, weighing over 1,000 pounds, rode directly onto the king. For 2 agonizing hours, the King of England lay completely unconscious. Many thought he was dead. When he finally woke up, he was a changed man. Modern neurologists believe he suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, one that severely altered his personality, turning a golden Renaissance prince into a paranoid, volatile, and ruthless tyrant. 5 days after this horrific accident, Queen Anne Boleyn, terrified by the news of her husband's near-death experience, went into premature labor. She miscarried a child that the doctors reported had the undeniable anatomy of a male. A boy, the savior of the Tudor dynasty, lost in a pool of blood on the floor of the Queen's chambers. While Anne Boleyn was literally lying in her bed, bleeding, grieving the loss of her son, and desperately fighting a fever, Henry VIII was already making his move. He did not sit by her bedside to comfort her. Instead, he was secretly funneling expensive gifts, heavy purses of gold, and secret love letters to one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting, a quiet, pale 27-year-old woman named Jane Seymour. Jane was not acting alone. She was the pawn of her incredibly ambitious and utterly ruthless brothers, Edward and Thomas Seymour. They saw the king's eye wandering, they smelled blood in the water, and they coached their sister on exactly how to ensnare the most powerful, dangerous man in the world. When Henry sent Jane a purse full of gold coins and a highly suggestive letter, Jane did not accept it. Instead, she fell to her knees in front of the king's messengers, kissed the letter, and handed it back unopened. She famously declared that she was a woman of good and honorable family, and she would only accept money from the king when God sent her a good and honorable husband. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Henry, who had spent the last decade dealing with the politically brilliant and argumentative Anne Boleyn, was completely intoxicating by this performance of pure submissive maidenhood. Jane played the ultimate hard to get, and the trap snapped shut. By February, it was an open secret in court. The imperial ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, wrote to the Holy Roman Emperor, detailing exactly how Jane's brothers were hiding her away in secret rooms so the king could visit her through hidden passages. By May, the machinery of state had been turned against Anne Boleyn. She was arrested on utterly fabricated charges of treason, adultery, and witchcraft. On May 19, 1536, Anne's head was struck from her shoulders by a French swordsman on the executioner's scaffold at the Tower of London. Do you know what Henry and Jane were doing the very next morning? May 20th? They were getting engaged, and just 11 days after Anne Boleyn's blood was washed off the wooden planks of the scaffold, Jane Seymour was dressed in magnificent wedding finery, standing at the altar, vowing to love and obey the man who had just murdered her predecessor. This was not a fairy tale romance. This was a calculated, ruthless, and terrifyingly cold political transaction. Jane Seymour knew exactly what Henry was capable of. She knew that to fail him was to invite the executioner's blade. And keeping that paralyzing atmosphere of terror in mind is absolutely crucial to understanding the horrifying medical events that unfolded in her final days. Once the crown was placed on Jane's head, the countdown began. She had one job, and only one job: produce a living male heir. Henry's paranoia was at an all-time high. A massive rebellion in the north of England, known as the Pilgrimage of Grace, threatened to tear him from his throne. During this rebellion, Jane made a fatal miscalculation. She fell to her knees and publicly begged Henry to restore the dissolved monasteries, hoping to appease the rebels. Henry, furious at being questioned by a woman in public, looked down at her and delivered a chilling, thinly veiled death threat. He told her to get up, mind her own business, and remember what had happened to the last queen when she tried to meddle in his affairs. Jane never spoke out of turn again. She became a ghost of a woman, terrified into absolute submission. Her only salvation was her womb. And finally, in early 1537, the court rejoiced. The queen was pregnant. By September of 1537, Jane entered what was known as her confinement. According to Tudor tradition, a pregnant queen was locked away in her private chambers weeks before the birth. The windows were sealed shut. Heavy, suffocating tapestries were nailed to the walls to block out any draft. Only women were allowed inside. The air was thick, stagnant, and heavily perfumed to mask the smell of unwashed bodies and chamber pots. It was the perfect breeding ground for bacteria, a suffocating velvet tomb. On October 9th, the agonizing ordeal began. Jane went into labor. But it was not a quick, merciful delivery. It was a brutal, catastrophic, 3-day obstetrical nightmare. For 3 days and 3 nights, the Queen of England screamed in agony. Modern doctors believe the baby was likely in a dangerous position, perhaps a breech or a transverse lie, making a natural delivery nearly impossible. As the hours turned into days, the panic in the palace reached a fever pitch. Henry VIII, terrified of losing another male child, ordered desperate religious processions across the city of London. Priests marched through the streets holding relics. Thousands of citizens were ordered to pray, and the air was thick with incense and terror. Finally, at 2 o'clock in the morning on October 12, 1537, on the eve of St. Edward's Day, the impossible happened. A child was born. A boy, alive, healthy, and breathing. The future King Edward VI. The celebrations that erupted across England were completely unprecedented. Cannons fired from the Tower of London. 2,000 rounds of artillery shook the city. Fountains in the streets flowed with free wine. Bonfires lit up the night sky from coast to coast. Henry VIII wept with joy. His 30-year quest, the bloody path that had cost him his soul, his religion, and 2 wives, was finally justified. God had smiled upon him. And Jane? Jane had survived the impossible, or so they thought. The official death certificate, the story that has been fed to the public for centuries, simply states that 12 days later, Jane died of puerperal fever, a common postpartum infection. In the 16th century, doctors did not wash their hands. The concept of germs was completely unknown. Midwives and physicians would routinely go from performing autopsies directly to delivering babies. Infection was a tragically common way for women to die. It made perfect sense. No one questioned it. But when modern medical historians finally got their hands on the raw, unfiltered court diaries, the secret medical logs, and the private ambassador reports from those specific 12 days, they found a trail of evidence that completely annihilated the infection narrative. Here is what actually happened in the Queen's suffocating bedchamber. Evidence number 1, the impossible timeline. If a woman contracts a severe postpartum bacterial infection, the decline is almost always steady, predictable, and devastating right from the start. The fever sets in within the first 48 to 72 hours, and the body begins to shut down. But Jane did not decline. In fact, for the first 7 to 8 days after giving birth to Edward, she was recovering remarkably well. She was sitting up in her grand bed well. She was holding her son. She was receiving high-profile guests, bishops, and lords. She was eating. She was laughing. She was signing official documents. On October 16th, 4 full days after the birth, the French ambassador, a man named Castellan, who had spies planted all over the royal household, wrote an official, highly confidential dispatch to his king in Paris. He stated explicitly that the Queen was, quote, making a full, rapid, and magnificent recovery. On October 18th, 6 days after the birth, Henry VIII himself was so confident in her complete recovery that he felt comfortable leaving her side. He packed up his entourage and traveled away from the palace at Hampton Court to go hunting. Why does a woman who is successfully fighting off the dangerous early days of postpartum recovery, a woman who is sitting up and receiving guests for a week, suddenly collapse and die in a matter of hours? Evidence number 2, the doctor's fatal confession. In the panicked, terrifying aftermath of her sudden death, Henry's royal doctors were fighting for their lives. They had to explain to a homicidal, paranoid king why his beloved wife was suddenly a corpse. In their desperate letters of defense, they made a terrifying admission. They confessed that during those initial days of her seemingly strong recovery, they had permitted the Queen to, quote, eat and drink whatever she desired. They admitted to feeding her heavily. In 1537, the Tudor diet for nobility was a nutritional nightmare. It consisted almost entirely of heavily salted meats, roasted game birds, dense breads, massive amounts of sugar, and copious quantities of rich, heavy wine. Vegetables and clean water were considered food for the poor and were strictly avoided, allowing a royal patient who had just survived a traumatic, tissue-destroying 3-day labor to consume a heavy Tudor banquet while lying completely motionless in a stagnant, unventilated room wasn't just poor judgment, it was catastrophic medical negligence. Modern medical historians point to this exact admission. Was it just a foolish mistake by arrogant doctors, or was it the trigger for something much more sinister? Evidence number 3, the true symptoms. When we bypass the official royal decrees and look at the private, smuggled diaries of Jane's closest female attendants, her final hours do not describe a standard bacterial infection at all. They describe a sudden, explosive spike in temperature. But more alarmingly, they describe violent, bone-rattling convulsions. They describe severe edema, a massive, rapid swelling of her limbs and face. They describe periods of intense delirium, followed by a rapid, terrifying plunge into a deep coma. When modern obstetricians, hematologists, and maternal-fetal medicine specialists review this exact specific cluster of symptoms, they do not point to puerperal fever. They point to 2 entirely different, deeply horrifying possibilities. The first is a massive pulmonary embolism. Jane had been lying flat on her back, completely immobilized in her bed for nearly a month, both before and after the birth. The sudden heavy feeding of rich foods, combined with total blood stasis in her legs from not moving, is the exact recipe for deep vein thrombosis. A massive blood clot could have formed in her leg, broken off, and traveled directly to her lungs, causing a sudden, violent, and fatal collapse. The second, and most likely possibility, is postpartum eclampsia. Eclampsia is a catastrophic, explosive spike in blood pressure that leads to terrifying seizures, cerebral hemorrhage, and total organ failure. It is an entirely different condition from a bacterial infection. And here is the horrifying reality of Tudor medicine. Eclampsia was completely untreatable in 1537. They didn't even have a word for blood pressure. But a wrong diagnosis means wrong treatment. And treating a woman for an infection when her blood vessels are violently rupturing in her brain, that can kill her faster than the disease itself. The doctors of the 16th century relied on the theory of the four humors. To cure a fever, they would bleed the patient. They would literally take a knife, open a vein in the dying queen's arm, and drain her blood into a bowl to let the evil humors escape. They would force her to drink violent laxatives to purge her bowels. Imagine it. Jane Seymour is convulsing. Her blood pressure is skyrocketing. Her brain is swelling. And the greatest medical minds of Europe are hovering over her, violently draining her blood and forcing her to swallow toxic, dehydrating purges. They didn't just fail to save her. Their frantic, ignorant treatments almost certainly accelerated her death. Evidence number 4, the king's absence. And then there is Henry. History books love to paint the picture of Henry holding Jane's hand as she took her final breath, weeping over the body of his true love. It is a lie. He wasn't there. When Jane's condition suddenly crashed on October 23rd, Henry was miles away. Desperate, frantic messengers were put on the fastest horses in England and sent, tearing through the countryside to retrieve the king. Henry raced back toward Hampton Court, but he refused to enter the room. As Jane Seymour lay dying, convulsing, choking on her own fluids, surrounded by terrified, praying women and helpless, panicking doctors, her husband, the man who had torn apart the country to marry her, stayed away. He locked himself in a separate wing of the palace. He could not handle the sight of illness. He could not handle the reality of death. Jane Seymour died in the absolute dead of night, alone in a crowd, on October 24, 1537. Here is the question that keeps medical historians up at night. Jane Seymour didn't die the way we were told. She died the way it was convenient for her to have died. And there is a profound, deeply sinister difference between those two things. If she died of severe medical mismanagement, of a sudden eclamptic crash triggered by a heavy diet and negligent doctors, or if she was bled to death by panicked physicians, why the massive, centuries-long cover-up? Why did the Crown instantly invent and heavily enforce the childbirth fever narrative? To understand the cover-up, you have to look at the bloody, paranoid politics of the Tudor court and ask yourself, who stood to lose their heads? First, look at the royal physicians. In Tudor England, admitting that you accidentally killed the Queen of England through dietary negligence, or that your botched medical diagnosis resulted in her death, was not just a career-ending move. It was a life-ending move. The executioner's block at Tower Hill was wet with the blood of people who had made much smaller mistakes than that. Henry VIII had executed men for simply whispering rumors about his health. If the doctors admitted they killed the mother of the future king, they would have been hung, drawn, and quartered. Their bodies would have been chopped into pieces and displayed on the gates of London. Signing a state death certificate that blamed childbirth fever, an invisible act of God that no doctor could possibly stop, was quite literally their only chance at survival. They lied to save their own lives. Then there was Henry himself. If it became public knowledge that his hand-picked, highly paid royal doctors had killed the queen, it reflected directly on him. It was a massive royal scandal that would make him the laughingstock of Europe. But most importantly, there was the Tudor propaganda machine. Little baby Edward VI was the golden child, the savior. He was supposed to be the ultimate proof that God approved of Henry's violent break from the Catholic Church. Edward needed an origin story that was legitimate, holy, and utterly unblemished by scandal. You absolutely cannot have the future King of England's birth associated with a suspicious, medically scandalous death. You cannot have rumors circulating in the taverns that the king's doctors poisoned the queen with bad food and forced bleeding. The story of the pure, saintly mother who bravely and peacefully sacrificed her own life to give England a king was a propaganda masterpiece. It was clean, it was poetic, it was politically bulletproof. The cover-up wasn't necessarily a malicious conspiracy designed to hurt Jane. It was brutally, ruthlessly practical. In Tudor England, they always told a cleaner story, because the truth was far too messy, far too incompetent, and far too dangerous. But what about Henry's famous grief? History tells us Henry was a fundamentally broken man after Jane died. He famously locked himself away in a dark room. He wore heavy black mourning clothes for 3 straight months. He grew out his beard in sorrow. He refused to remarry for over 2 years. And of course, he left strict instructions in his final will to be buried directly beside her in St. George's Chapel, the ultimate romantic gesture, proving to the world that they were destined to be reunited in the afterlife. It is the greatest romantic myth in British history. Let's look past the royal propaganda and look at the actual surviving paperwork. Within those exact same 3 months of deep, agonizing mourning, while Henry was supposedly paralyzed by grief, locked in his dark room crying over his lost love, his ambassadors across Europe were incredibly busy. Their mission? To ruthlessly evaluate replacement brides. Henry didn't actively send out a global decree for a new wife immediately, but he certainly didn't stop his men from aggressively window shopping. Need proof? Just 2 weeks. 14 days. That is how long it took after Jane Seymour took her last agonizing breath for Henry to write an official diplomatic letter to King Francis I of France. In one paragraph of this letter, Henry laments the tragic, heartbreaking loss of his beloved, perfect queen. He writes of his profound sorrow. In the very next paragraph, literally sentences later, he casually asks Francis about any high-ranking French ladies who might be physically attractive and politically worthy of taking her place in the English bed. He even suggested a bizarre meetup where the most beautiful women of France could be brought to a tent for him to inspect them. Does this sound like a man utterly destroyed by grief? Or does it sound like a man who had perfected the theatrical performance of grief to mask his own monstrous nature? And what about that famous, highly romanticized burial? The story goes that he loved her so deeply that he immediately demanded to rest beside her for eternity. False. Completely false. Henry's decision to be buried beside Jane Seymour was not made in 1537 when she died. It wasn't made in 1540. He didn't make that final decision until 1547, a full decade after she died, and just days before his own massive, decaying body finally gave out. In the 10 years between Jane's death and his own, Henry married 3 more women. He divorced one, Anne of Cleves. He beheaded another, the teenager Catherine Howard, and he nearly executed his final wife, Catherine Parr. So why, out of all 6 wives, does history remember Jane as the most loved? Why did Henry choose her as his eternal resting partner? The answer is painfully, brutally unromantic. Jane Seymour is the favorite, because she was the only one who gave him the one thing he valued above human life, a surviving son. Edward VI was Henry's legacy, his dynasty, his validation from the Almighty. But there is a second, much darker reason. Jane died before she ever had the chance to disappoint him. Think about it. If Jane had lived, she would have eventually aged. She would have inevitably gained weight. She might have suffered miscarriages, just like Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. She might have started voicing political opinions that annoyed him, as she had tried to do during the Pilgrimage of Grace. She might have embarrassed him by dying at the exact moment she delivered his ultimate prize. Jane Seymour was forever frozen in time as the perfect, silent, obedient vessel. She was the perfect wife, entirely because she was a dead wife. When we pull back the heavy velvet curtain of royal dates, propaganda, and doctored medical records, we are left with a profoundly tragic human reality. We are looking at a story of absolute exploitation. Think of her son, Edward VI, the Golden Boy, the son Henry sacrificed his wives, his kingdom, and his soul to get. Edward took the throne as a frail, heavily manipulated child at age 9. He died of a horrific lung infection, likely tuberculosis, at age 15. He never truly ruled his own country. His greedy uncles, Jane's brothers, used the boy king as a puppet to enrich themselves, until they too were eventually executed for treason. And worse, Edward never knew his mother. He had no living memories of her warmth, no memory of her smile, no sound of her voice singing to him in the nursery. All the boy king ever knew of his mother, Jane Seymour, were cold, flat painted portraits hanging in drafty hallways, and a sterilized, state-approved script of her noble sacrifice. She wasn't a mother to him, she was a political martyr. And what of Jane herself, the true, forgotten victim of Tudor ambition? She did not choose to be born into a fiercely ambitious family that pushed her, practically shoved her into a dangerous king's bed. She did not choose to step into a marriage built directly on the fresh grave and the severed neck of her former mistress, Anne Boleyn. She was a woman trapped in an era where women, even queens, were nothing more than political currency and breeding stock. Jane Seymour never had the chance to be anything other than what Henry VIII demanded her to be. In life, she was the perfect, silent replacement, a blank canvas for a tyrant's fantasies. In death, she became the perfect martyr, a convenient, beautiful tragedy that washed away the sins of the king. History, written by men who worship power, remembers her as Henry's true love, the ultimate Tudor romance. But the suppressed documents, the frantic letters of terrified doctors, and the cold reality of human biology suggest she was something far more heartbreaking. She was a woman who gave a sociopathic tyrant absolutely everything he ever wanted, and received in return a violent, terrifying medical death, and a fabricated story that wasn't even entirely her own. 500 years later, Jane Seymour lies buried deep beneath the stone floors of St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, resting in the darkness beside the massive lead-lined coffin of the king who supposedly loved her more than any other human being on earth. But love, in Henry VIII's terrifying world, was never what it appeared to be. Love was conditional, love was dangerous, love was a weapon. The official story etched into history says she died peacefully of childbirth fever, a tragic act of God. The hidden documents and modern science suggest she died of severe medical negligence, of frantic misdiagnosis, of a medical system completely paralyzed by the sheer terror of displeasing a homicidal king. And perhaps most chilling of all, when you look at the entirety of her short, quiet, deeply manipulated life, she may have died of the exact same thing that eventually destroyed every single woman who had the misfortune of entering King Henry VIII's orbit, becoming exactly what he needed. Now I want to know what you think. Look at the timeline, look at the medical evidence, look at the king's immediate search for a new bride. Was King Henry VIII genuinely devastated and broken by Jane's death? Or was his 3-month mourning period just another calculated, brilliant performance by a man trying to convince the world he had a heart? Leave your detailed answer down in the comments below. I read every single one, and this debate has divided historians for centuries. And if this hidden, unsterilized history of the Tudors is revealing dark truths you have never heard in history class before, hit that subscribe button. Because the rabbit hole of Tudor cover-ups goes much, much deeper, and the next investigation is already waiting for you. We are going back to the very beginning, to the Spanish princess, to Catherine of Aragon, the first and longest-serving wife. The woman history books say simply faded away and died naturally of a broken heart in a damp castle. But what the royal embalmers found hidden deep inside her body when they cut her open tells a completely different, deeply sinister, and highly illegal story. Click the video on your screen right now to uncover the true cause of Catherine of Aragon's death, and I will see you there.